So I'm going to move along to our final speaker of this first session. If anybody is looking at the clock feeling concerned, please don't be. We have built padding into the day. It just means I get to talk less, which is probably preferable anyway. So I'm going to introduce our next speaker, who I had the real pleasure of spending some time with recently in Brussels on a little visit when I was there. And Madeleine took me for the local specialty, which is, of course, mussels. It was delicious. And over the course of my lunch with Madeleine, I was just completely, I have to have Madeleine come and speak. She is doing some really interesting work. She is a huge believer in equipping students, which she will tell you about. She will tell you much about it. A real believer in equipping students with thinking skills, learning skills, working skills, not just for their student time, but for what comes afterwards. So I just thought it was a great perspective from someone who's really in the thick of it. So Madeleine, if you want to come up, we'll try and get your computer set up and hope it doesn't behave badly. Thank you both to Miko and to Sharon. I will try and make sure we can spend some more time doing Q&A, because you guys seem like you've actually got some questions. And let's see if we can get this going. Where does that go? I have to say, having badmouthed the Macs earlier today, they're 2-1 up on the Windows. Is that 3-1 now straight away? Suspense is killing us.
Thank you, Liam. All right, good morning. How are you doing? Fine? Good. Okay, so I'm a teacher. I teach English as a foreign language. And today I will talk to you about my students and what we do together. So I do my best to equip them with thinking and working skills. Okay, that's a big title. Let's have a look. Let's have a closer look. And let's have a look at where the whole story started. Right there. Do you know what that is? Chez Léon. So, yeah, it's a napkin. Well, it's bigger than a napkin because it's the size of a tablecloth. And that's what happens when you put mapping people together in a restaurant. They just ruin the place. So thank you, Liam, for that little session. So that's basically the discussion we had with Liam. And these are the main ideas that came out. So Liam, our discussion is about to go public. Okay? Okay, so to start with, let me tell you who I am. So my name is Madeleine Philippe. I'm a teacher, as I told you. I worked at the beginning of my career in company, in adult education as well, and now I'm more in the academic field. And my objective is to equip and empower my students with communication tools, of course, because the objective is to make them speak and being able to communicate. I want them to be able to think and to be ready to work. My students are aged 18 to 21, and I work for 2 institutions in Brussels, which are, on one hand, a university, which is called Université Saint-Louis, and the other one, ICHEC, which is a management school, and I teach students in economics, business engineering, political sciences, and management. What a program. Maybe, who went through one of these curricula? Anyone in the room? Business, management? Anyone went through that? A few people? Yeah, quite a few people? Okay. So maybe you remember your students' time. And I don't know what you kept from that time, but that's one of my essential questions. Which skills should students be equipped with when starting to work? It's my concern, but this is also yours. And I need you in order to answer that question. I need you as a community. But don't worry, I'm not counting only on you. I also put some input in there, and the strategy I use most is we map and tell. So in class, we just map and tell, map and tell. So that's basically what we do. So having my students map is generating, structuring their ideas, Of course, we also use visual tools like mind maps, message maps, diagrams, and of course, being to tell about that, being able to communicate in another language. As Sharon said this morning, I had to do a presentation in Spanish. Okay, it's really challenging for a non-native speaker to be able to express himself or herself in public. It's really taking risks. So how do you cope with all of that? So taking risks, structuring your ideas, presenting in public, wow, that's the challenge of my students. All right, so what my students basically have got to do is to go from point A to point B. They're in the academic world, and of course, what is ahead of them is the real working world. Now, I'm going to hack some of the speakers of this morning. So what is the missing link? Liam will tell you mapping, of course. It may be one, but let's see how we can really match both and which link that this community can bring. All right, one of Liam's favorite tools is this Diverge, Explore, Converge model, which is brilliantly developed in Game Storming, a book you have probably read. And this model actually could very well fit Miko's, create debate in the first part, and then you could have this effective and disruptive debate, and then take a decision. You could apply it to about any situation. So the initial stage is really setting the theme, bringing in all the ideas, bringing all that can be thought of, exploring, examining which option is going to be best, what is going to come out of that, and converge, take decisions, and go for actions. And action is also one of the key words that Sharon used this morning. So we have this template, which is quite an interesting one. Then I'm going to show you what we do in class and which tools I really want to give my students in order to be able to, become your future business partners, future clients, future bosses, who knows. So we have this game storming element, which we've already spoken about. Another one is what I named classifying. So this is classifying and analyzing. I just couldn't choose between these two words, so I just coined a new one. And classifying, of course, this is dealing with infobesity. My students are just bombarded by information. And I had a very interesting discussion yesterday with a French author of mind mapping books yesterday about infobesity. What if it was not just, treating this data that piles up, but rather treating a flow and seeing data information as a flow. Students need to be taught that skill. It won't come like this. Identifying what matters the most, that's quite a challenge. That's what our old Greek friends from ancient Greeks called the first principle. What is the essential in the text I'm reading? What is the essential in my business? Where is the essential info? That's really a challenge. Having 3 key elements is also a tool which is really functional and helpful because it helps reduce to the essential. Now, if you appeal to the intelligence of my students, just take the Latin root interligere, which means to link things, which is what intelligent means, connecting the dots, fitting in the big picture and zooming in and out. Okay, you have a student starting to work in an organization. He or she's brand new, doesn't know much, so he or she is going to focus on what he or she has been assigned. But how to get the big picture, how to see where things fit. I mean, it's true for a student, it's true for anyone arriving in a new place, but it's really important that they know that it's essential to know what they do, but also that they are ready to, see what are the other things around them. That's essential. If they don't, they're going to miss out something. Now, what types of maps do we use in our lessons? We do use mind mapping. This is, I would say, my favorite tool. Well, good, I'm here. This is, good thing. And I'm just going to extend a little bit on that map because that was a fun activity. And actually what is very interesting is that from what this morning's speakers said, we can remember this word collaborative. We can remember that expertise is in the room. And how did we do that? Well, you know, my students have to make presentations and debates. So we had one 2 weeks ago on human cloning. Usually we ask students to prepare a vocab list before so that all the other students can prepare and blah, blah, blah. But they usually end up with lists of just all the words that they do not understand, which are not keywords, because keywords are the ones which are really important. So, okay, let's not do that. Let's do it the other way around. So when the group started making the presentation, the others in the room were listening, and I told them, now, you have one mission while you're listening. Identify the most important elements. And then at the end of the debate, they all had a short list of the 10 essential words about the debate. And we shared all of that, and I was doing some live mapping in front of them, and the students were like, wow, that's cool. And it was really interesting because, okay, where do I put it? Does it match with this? Where does this go? Where would you put that? Why do you put this in here? Why not there? And it was collective intelligence, group decision, group discussion to end up with a valid vocab list that everybody had, you know, participated in, taken part in. It was really a group, collective intelligence action. This is not exactly a mind map, this is a message map. The concept has been developed by Carmine Gallo, but to be honest, you just click on the button and change the structure and you end up with a mind map. So the idea behind it is not very different. That's a map that my students use to present companies. My business, second-year business students, one of the assignments is, okay, present your company. Ha ha. So they come in. I just added this one for vocab purposes because I want them to use the different facts. And then they've got to choose 3 aspects of the company that they think are essential, like values, but these have got to be adjectives. And then they've got to put examples and demonstrations of these elements. To be honest, I've never had such great presentations as this year. They were all structured, clear, good content. I was like, wow. And I really congratulated them. It's not that difficult to just, you know, fill in these little boxes. Of course, they've got to do some thinking, but they knew exactly what they had to do, where they were going, what structure they should use, and the presentations were clear. That kind of tool, they presented their company with me, but, you know, when they have their own company, when they'll present their own project, when they'll communicate anything, they can use that. All right, this is just an example of, well, how to make a diagram. I'm not going to get into that in too much detail, but we use quite a lot with our students a technique to summarize articles and then press articles and then present them. And it's a visual technique, which is very interesting, but we also provide them with graphic organizers to express their ideas. So this is just a short illustration. So these are the mapping tools that we use. Of course, we ask them to map, and we ask them to tell, of course, because they map and tell, of course. Okay, so of course, when you're a student and you've got to communicate, and when I'm me as a language teacher, I'm very much focused on the language that they use. I'm focused on their speaking, listening, writing, reading skills, which are, you know, like the basic skills for language learning. And of course, we focus on their linguistic skills, on the vocab, grammar, pronunciation. And I'll just show you an example of a map which I made quite a few years back for a class of beginners about the rules for the present simple. And in that map, you have all you need to know about the present simple in English. No more, no less, period. If they can master these different things, then master the present simple. Of course, this map, if you're working with a beginner, you're going to work step by step through it. And it's never given as a first tool. It's more recap at the end of a few lessons. But here they've got the essential. That's another really, you cannot really see what's that, but what is written there. But it's like a summary, a recap of all the linking words that our students have to use, like however, but, nevertheless, in conclusion, you know, all these little things that show that you're doing some thinking in there. You've got all of these summarized, and it's a big hit. It's a big hit because they've got everything on one page, like, oh, cool, I just have to study that, not more than that. Yes, it's just one page. And I've also put some visual indications of the type of sentence structure they've got to use. Because making a difference between conjunction, preposition, and adverbs is something quite a lot of students have to review before being able to use that. All right, in terms of communication, they also work on, so we work on storytelling, we work on verbal and non-verbal communication. What is really funny, it's not very big, but you know, like 55% in communication, 55% come from the body language, 38% from the voice, and 7% from the content. What do we focus on at university? 7%. So of course it's worth you know, mentioning the other aspects and working on that a little bit. All right, in terms of learning, because of course my students are super learners, I want them to do some thinking, which is linked to what we said previously about mapping. I want them to do some understanding, and this is just an example of a map that a student has done after reading an article on that movement in Germany, and this is a recap of what he or she has read, and then with all that input, the student is able to present the article. But there's a big question for my students. Are they really digital natives or not? My students, so now age 18 to 21, stand kind of in the middle of that. So you see the different elements for the two. I'll just put this. Yeah, that's fine. Like this. So digital natives are supposed to be high speed, multitasking, have a non-linear approach, to have iconic skills first, to be connected, collaborative, learn by searching, learn by playing, by externalizing and using fantasy. Some do, but not all of them. Maybe not all these elements. Quite a lot of them are really good at learning by absorbing. It's like, you know, like what they do most. So this more conventional part, so you have conventional speed, monotasking, linear approach, reading skills first, standalone, competitive, so absorbing, separating learning and playing, learning by internalizing and focused on reality. So this big gap, this big link between the two has to be worked on. And not all of my students are digital natives at all. But of course, if you have digital natives, you've got to think of digital teaching. So digital teaching, when I make, you know, these summaries I give out to my students, I try to think of what were the most important criteria when I teach, when I have a recap, to bring them. Well, engagement, of course, is key, but it should be visual, one page, non-linear, should be able to zoom in and out. One image is one concept. It should be immediate. You should see the essential. It should be connected and collaborative. So this is the guidelines I use in my preparation work. Now, of course, my students are, for big parts, going to the business world. And when they present a company, we just saw the, you know, the diagram earlier. Well, this is a student called Thomas who presented the company McDonald's. I just wanted to share that example with you because his preparation was really clear, and once he has that, you know, he's set to do that. This is a map which is absolutely impossible to read. That's normal. That's absolutely normal because that's all the basic vocab that a student in our classes needs to know about business. But when you don't know a language that much, when you're not that much familiar with business, you've got to learn a lot of things, like to succeed in, you've got to remember that it's the right preposition. You should also know the word subsidiary. And all of this has to be learned, and the mass of vocab is huge. And this is just to show you a recap of all the words they have got to know for just one small part of one chapter they see throughout the year. Okay, we still have that shape of a message map. When students, you know, we often have this job interview simulation. Well, what I ask them is to use this canvas and they're going to talk about themselves, personality, goals, and they are going to find these 3 keywords again and give some examples and demonstrations. Talking about themselves in a non-linear way is good in their students' time. It will be good in the future, and it will always be interesting for them to keep that tool. Then this is another example of a map that we use for negotiations. So we have one term with the third-year students working on negotiations, and they've got to learn that, okay, there's me and you, and we're going to negotiate together. So this is the principle of the double bubble map. You have the objective, the tradables, the settlement in the middle, but you have things that you can negotiate and things that you cannot negotiate. And so this helps structure their negotiation. They can use it in the future as well. Maybe you could use it, who knows? And of course, all of this brings us to you, and to the different people who are going to speak today. So we are going to have different topics that you can see here. And what would be really interesting, now I'm talking to the community of mappers, is I identified a few skills, a few things that I saw as a teacher in my context. But it would be so nice that the whole community contributes to providing tools for these students and to, help them really go forward and help them maybe think lifelong with thinking and working skills, and to think not only out of the box, but in new boxes. Thinking in new boxes with this completely changing reality that we have is essential, because to go from point A to point B in today's world, you really need the ability to diverge, explore, and converge. Thank you very much. Timing is okay, isn't it?
Perfect. To the second. That was fantastic. I'm sure you'll agree. I think from my perspective, when you see the list of supposed attributes of digital natives, a lot of them to me look like those digital natives are going to get very frustrated with legacy tools and legacy ways of working. So we are potentially, people in Madeleine's role, are potentially responsible for setting those people up for success or failure, which I think is quite compelling. And I think that's part of the reason why I was very interested to have Madeleine talk. So I'm afraid you probably want a coffee and a break, but are there any questions for Madeleine, just while we've got some time? There's a lot of content there, but I think it's transition. How many, by the way, of you in the room would classify yourselves as being in the education half of the room? And the rest would classify yourselves as being in the business camp for the sake of a... So there are some on the fences, okay.
So what is the link?
Any questions for Madeleine while we've got her here?
Thank you for that. Can you just, maybe I missed that, but once you start introducing this concept to your students, what are the key stumbling blocks for them initially to get into this mindset?
This is like, this is taught like this. I made a recap of all the tools that I use. And we just use one at a time, little at a time, work on one skill or the other one, but it's never as a big thing. But one of the key challenges for them is probably identifying the most important elements. That's like, this a big one. Getting into, when we ask them to do diagrams, which are kind of mind maps, I would say, being able to go in the abstract level of ideas, identify things is definitely difficult. So this is also linked to the zooming in and out and, taking distance. It's a whole process that has to be gone through.
I was just curious as to why you felt the need to teach them a different technique, message maps, to give presentations, when in fact the mind map will do the same thing. And I'm not saying that mind mapping is necessarily any better than message maps, but if you've got one tool that can do two things, was there some particular reason for using a different tool for that?
The tool is different, yes and no. Because if you could just change the structure and make it round as a mind map. It would be exactly the same in terms of mental structure. But the thing is, I found some really good teaching material to use in class from these message maps. I found a clear explanation, I found a video, and I thought that would be really clear to students. So that's the material I found. But I think that the way that you're going to make your brain works is not completely different. It's just having things around rather than beneath. So for me, at least, I don't see a big difference. But we could make it as a mind map. Yes, of course.
One final question. I thought I saw a hand somewhere. Two very quick ones.
And the question I had was, is this you, in terms of your methodology of teaching, is this a community, or the education community, do you all think the same way, or is this you trying to do something a bit different because you've seen the shortfallings of traditional education and teaching, and this is the way of the future?
This is more me doing this and loving this and experimenting. And so I would say that the essential driving force behind this is an individual teacher. But these are things which are, it's a trickle-down effect or spreading effect. I don't know how to call it, but the more you use it, if your colleagues see that it works, okay, they do use some of the tools I use. But the ideal would be to have a community, of course, which this room could be part of course.
I was just going to respond to the question you raised on whether we're in education or business. I've suddenly realised myself, with clients, a lot of the time I'm involved, although not a trained teacher, but actually educating clients about the areas that we're talking about, which is tax and financial matters. Actually, they're not separate. It's just, obviously I haven't been trained as a teacher, but part of what we're doing is actually educating and helping clients to understand. So taking those principles is very helpful.
So how many other people in the room would say they're actually quite often doing teaching roles, but they're not a teacher, they have no qualifications, they are doing teaching again? So I think that's why I was very interested to have Madeleine come speak, because a lot of what she's talking about, you're absolutely right. Lots of us are in roles where we have no teaching experience, teacher training, but we are somehow supposed to impart knowledge, wisdom to those who we are charged with dealing with. So I'm going to say thank you very much, guys, for your patience. Apologies to Sharon for our technology failings. I'm going to suggest there's coffee and tea outside, so if we just take a quick sort of 15-minute break, we should be able to just scrabble ourselves back on time. Could I just ask that people who I haven't seen yet who are in the next slot, Sergey, I think I can see you over in the corner there, Norman, who I don't know where Norman is here, nobody panic. Craig, I've already dealt with, and then we're good. Okay. So
And one last thing, Steve Jobs always does that. One last thing. I'm just going to hack Sharon's quote. Know your box and achieve the task.
Okay, so we'll do 15 minutes.